Now that we had a look at an important feature, default arguments, which helps us with writing more flexible functions, let's have a look at another feature. Not really related to our game here, to be honest, but related to functions. So I'll add a brand new function here at the bottom of the file, since it is, as mentioned, not related to the game. And the function here can again be created with one of the three syntaxes you learned. Doesn't matter which one you use, I'll go for the arrow function. And I'll name it SumUp. Now my idea here is that we can pass in as many arguments as we want and build a sum for those. So not an array, but as many arguments as we want. So here I want to have like A, B, C, D, but I want to have an infinite amount of arguments here. That's my idea. And you can see where the problem lies. I can't know when I'm writing this code with how many arguments this function will be called. Well, obviously, I will know if I'm the one calling it here, but let's say this is more dynamic. It's done inside of a loop, which is based on some user input. So anything where we can't fully control how often it will be called. So here I will call it myself in the code, but again, let's assume I'm not the one calling it like this, but instead we wrote some code where this is called dynamically with a different amount of arguments. So we could be calling this with 1, 5, 10, -3, 6, 10, and so on. But I also want to be able to call it with an extra argument or with 2 extra arguments, something like this. So this should be flexible regarding the amounts of arguments it gets. Now, you could think, well, since JavaScript is forgiving and we can have more parameters than we need, we can of course build this function with a lot of parameters in mind and hope that it never gets called with more than that. Well, hope is never something you should rely on. And in addition, you still might run into problems where all unused parameters are undefined. And if you then use this in some mathematical calculation, you will probably get incorrect results or not a number as a result. So this is not really a great solution. Well, another solution would be to simply force the user to pass in an array, right? Something like this. Numbers is an array. Now here we pass an array. Here I don't, but I'll just comment this out for now. And now we can use a loop here, build a sum, start at 0, use our loop, where we go through all the numbers here, with the good old for-off loop you learned about, and then simply add each number to the sum, and in the end, we simply return the sum here. Now we have a SumUp function, and if we give that a try, and we console log the result of calling that function here, save that and reload, and also avoid this syntax error and use a semicolon instead of a comma, important. So save that and reload. We get 29 here, which is the sum of these numbers, like 6, 16, 13, 19, 29. So this works, and of course, you could kind of implement it like this. Now the thing is, not in all JavaScript programs you're going to write you might be fine with a solution like this. Maybe you really want to allow that the function is called with multiple arguments, for whatever reason that may be, but you want to make sure that this is the case. In such a case, you can call the so-called REST operator. It looks like the spread operator, which I showed to you in the behind the scenes module. You add 3 dots, but the place where you use that operator is different from the spread operator. You might remember that spread operator was used when you created an object or when you created an array. And then you could use the 3 dots in there to take an existing object or an existing array and pull out all the key value pairs or all the elements of the array and add them to the new object or new array. Now here we use the 3 dots in a different place. We use it in a parameter list. And there, in such a function parameter list, it does something different. Instead of pulling elements out of an array, here, it takes all arguments this function gets, and that might be as many as you want, and it merges them into an array. So it builds an array here inside of the function. So now you can call the function without passing an array by having real different arguments, but they're getting merged into an array inside of the function, which you of course don't see when you just call the function. And then we can work with that array and in this case return our sum. So now we can also call this function like this. So with these 2 lines of code I have here at the bottom. This will now work if we save and reload and we get 29 and 142 as sums because of that REST operator, which is really, really useful therefore, since it gives you more flexibility when you're writing your functions. Now, one important note about the rest operator, it always has to be the last argument in your list. For example, if you expect another argument a here, well, then a can never be passed in, right? Because this always consumes all arguments and merges them together in an array. So if you would have arguments after an argument which uses the rest operator, you can never reach that argument. So here we even get an error, therefore rest parameter must be last formal parameter for this exact reason. So this is not allowed. You also can only have one parameter, one rest parameter I mean, because for the same reason. This automatically merges all arguments together, so there is no room for a second rest parameter. What you can have though is parameters in front of this. A, for example, and B, and whatever you want. Because that simply means that the first two arguments in this case, 1 for A and 5 for B, will be assigned to these parameters, and only all the other arguments or parameters thereafter will be merged together. So if we do that, now A and B will be excluded from the calculation, and therefore if we run this we get different results than before. To be precise, the same result as before, -6, because 1 plus 5 is 6, because that's now not included in the calculation because it's not included in the numbers array. So you really got a lot of flexibility here with the rest operator. Now a little side note, when not using an arrow function, so when using the function keyword, so let's say we build a subtract up function and now I build it with the function keyword, then you can also use the rest operator there. Nothing wrong with that. You can build it in the exact same way as you do with the arrow function. But here you actually also have another way of building this. So let me copy that code. But of course here now I subtract all the values. So that's the difference between the two functions. And now let me call this. So subtract up. And here I have 1, 10, 15, 20, something like this. Well, now of course it would fail because numbers here, what we're looking for, will not be defined. Previously this was our rest argument, our automatically generated array. Here it's missing. So therefore now, unsurprisingly, if I reload, we'll get a little error here. Now you can, of course, as I just explained, use the rest parameter here, just as you did it in the arrow function. And if you do so, everything will be fine. We can reload and it works. But now, and that's the blast from the past thing, we can also use something different. In functions created with the function keyword, you have a special variable available, which you never define, which you don't accept as an argument, but which is just magically there, so to say. And that's the arguments variable. Arguments, as you see, is already marked as a keyword because it's built into JavaScript. You can use it inside of functions, but only inside of functions that use the function keyword. And it gives you an array-like object, not a true array, but array-like, with all the arguments this function got. So before the rest operator was introduced, which happened with ES6, this was the way of building a function like this one. So this was then the automatically merged array. So if I now save this, this runs again with -46 as a result. So this is an alternative to using the rest operator. That being said, using the rest parameter is recommended because this is always a bit strange to have this magic arguments thing coming out of nowhere, and it's much cleaner to define this rest parameter. So whilst this does work, no matter if you're using the function keyword or not, you should always use the rest operator. So don't use that. Just wanted to show it to you because you will find it in some JavaScript snippets you might be looking at, and it was the only way of achieving this before this rest operator was introduced.